I thought I'd do a video on this Harbor Freight circular saw sharpening sharpener modification that I did. This is mostly for those who might have purchased a Harbor Freight circular saw sharpener. I bought one and I wasn't too happy with some of its features, but I'm not sorry I bought it because for the price I paid for it, you know, I got the motor, the diamond blade, this arm support supports your saw blade, and all those things made it well worth having, even though I modified it considerably. A few things I didn't like about the Harbor Freight setup from the factory is that the blade support is on this arm, and this arm, for those of you who have this purchased already or maybe going to, is supported on this post, and it's down in there. So this really didn't have a lot of support. Once you crank this knob down, well, I think there was a washer there before, no matter how hard you crank it down, it seemed to give a little if you weren't careful. And not only that, but when you're trying to adjust it, you know, even though this knob is on here, as you're setting it up, you know, it kind of flops around on you, and I didn't care for that too much. So basically, number one, I didn't like that. Decided I needed something that would give me a little more support and a little more ease at setting it up. So I came up with building a box out of MDF board, 1/2 inch. You could use 3/4. MDF board is, you can get it at Home Depot. A 1/4 sheet of MDF board from Home Depot will be enough to make this if you were going to make one. The basic idea of it is that these two parallel sides here that are fairly critical when you make it to get them perfectly parallel to each other and the right height gives you a sliding platform, or at least a sliding for the sliding platform to rest on. As you can see, I glued these 2 1/2 inch strips that I just cut out on the table saw, pin nailed them to keep them in place along with the glue. And so that drops right on. And believe it or not, even though it's just wood, basically fiberboard or whatever you want to, MFD stands for medium density, MDF I should say, medium density fiber board, I guess. But it really slides quite smoothly, just that against itself. And so I made that sliding platform to give this something to rest on. As you can see, I put a bolt here, which is the metric bolt that fits these knobs, and drop that thing right. Sorry about that. Anyway, that size metric bolt that you would need for this is M10-1.50 by 40. 40 being 40 millimeters long, 1.5 is the thread pitch, 10 millimeters the diameter. And you can see I just drilled holes. You can drill multiple holes. You got a lot of variation, a lot of possibilities for whatever you want to do in terms of the arm placement. Usually you'll find out one spot works pretty good for every size blade you got. Put that through and then put a nut on. Make sure you buy a metric nut to lock that down. And then number two, another thing I didn't like about the Harbor Freight setup was this motor, you know, it had this setup where you move the motor in and out. Well, it doesn't really have a very smooth sliding ability, I guess is the way to put it. It's just on these 2 shafts. There's no ball bearings of any kind, and it just doesn't seem to be a very smooth operation when you want to bring the motor in and out to sharpen each tooth blade. So basically, I didn't like that, and I did away with it. Lock the motor down tight. Basically, there's a stop right here. I don't know if you can see that. That was another thing, number 3. When you're bringing your blade in and adjusting it so you don't go too far into the gullet of the between the teeth, you adjust that stop to stop at that point. Well, it works. It functions okay, but I came up with this stop. And that stop is extremely easy to reach in and change at a moment's notice. If you see you're off just a hair and you want to go just a little deeper, a little less deep, it's so easy to give it a little fine-tuned job there. This is the blade support. Now this Harbor Freight sharpener came with a blade support that was over here, and what that did was it gives the blade something to rest on up close to where the wheel is. So what I did was took that off, and I just made my own blade support. Basically, when this is on here, I'll adjust this arm, and so the blade is just over that support. At some point, it can be, doesn't have to be critical as far as the placement of it, but that allows the blade to be supported so it doesn't tip down when you're coming into the blade, diamond blade. As you notice, this is spring loaded, so see how you can tip that? Well, it keeps it from tipping on this side. So that's their blade support. The ratcheting pawl that they had set up, that was really quite difficult to get that set up, I thought, to where it worked really well, to where it stopped the tooth, and then when you're coming in, sometimes it would hit the tooth too hard, take too much off. Basically, I just did away with that. I don't even use a ratcheting pawl. The other thing is your angle. Some blades are just flat, 90 degrees to the plane, straight down, perfectly, no angle set in them. But I understand, I'm not sure if I have any, but I understand there are some blades that every other tooth has an angle. And of course they make it possible to set up for that angle by loosening this. This down below here has a pointer on it, 0, 10 here, 10 to the other side. So that tilts your motor 5, 10, 7, 8, 20, I don't know. I have no idea what the angles are. I think maybe around 10 on some of them. I haven't come across it yet, but basically you can sharpen those kind of blades. But you know, you gotta loosen this and loosen that nut on the other side, and then try to get a reading off this little pointer. It only moves 10 degrees, only moves about 1/4 of an inch, so it's really kind of a guessing game as to whether you got 10 degrees or what. So what I did was I came up with this little doodad. It's kind of you might call it a little bit of a Mickey Mouse setup, but it works. And basically, I just put a piece of flat stock across here, put it on with a couple of hose clamps, large hose clamps, and as you can see, 10 degrees is, that 0 is not, this line right here is 0. I gotta mark that out a little better. But 10 degrees, this reading is far more accurate you can put it right on your 10 degree mark, lock it down, and as you notice, instead of 1/4 of an inch, you got like 1.5 inches to give you a more accurate, more precise reading on your angle. And then to get it back to 0, you know, it's so easy to bring it back to that mark to 0. And I find you do need to tighten this down. I thought about making some kind of a locking mechanism there so I wouldn't have to go in here and unloosen these bolts every time you want to change the angle. But at least you can change the angle with a little more precision, I think. And the way I got my 0, by the way, is not by reading that pointer. What I do is I get my reading glasses on, of course, and so what I'll do is get the blade over here somewhere and get a square, and you can pretty much eyeball that diamond tooth blade. You can bring it in towards just a hairline, and you can tell really with quite a bit of accuracy whether you're at 0 degrees, and you can mark this. You could adjust it slightly by just bending this a little if you had to say you're off a little and then want to remark your... That's just a piece of 1/4 inch Luan that basically you can use anything you wanted to. The reason I curve it is if I come in here straight, the motor comes down and hits that. So that works pretty good. The sliding method works good. The motor stop, or actually in this case the sliding table platform or whatever stop, works beautifully. That is a 3/8 bolt. That's a threaded rod coupler I put on just to give you a little more ease of grabbing it and twisting it. There's another threaded rod coupler right here that I welded to this flat stock and then just screwed it in. And that's all you need for that. I cut this out just so you can get your fingers in there and adjust that easily. Now, as far as setting this up, like I said, I find it so much easier because of the fact that you don't have this flopping around. This arm is nice and supported while you're setting it up. So basically, I'll come in, I'll get my stop pretty much out of the way, and I'll bring it in and kind of basically, if you want to know the truth, eyeball what I think is the right angle on that tooth. And knowing that I don't have to be perfect right at this point in time. Crank this down, and another thing is when you crank it down, it's nice and, you know, it doesn't have that ability to kind of flex around on you or move. Sometimes I found when I crank this down on that pedestal post that it still would move, and then now you got to set up all over again. So, I mean, don't hurt to crank down. Reason is, when you crank down on this, you're tightening this whole arm against this flat surface, and it gives it a lot of friction and you know, stability. I'm going to show you how I go about setting my tooth angle in relation to the carbide, excuse me, the diamond tip blade. I'll get the stop more or less out of the way, and then I'll come in and eyeball the tooth against the diamond blade. By the way, if you run out of room here because you're hitting here, you can either alter the size of this or just bring this over more like that. Sometimes you think, oh, I'm all the way and I can't go any further. But that's because you're up against here. Anyway, bring it in, and I find out a good pair of glasses and a light sometimes. I can tell I'm off. I need to come that way a little. And right there looks pretty good. So what I'll do at that point in time, go ahead and lock it down. I'll keep the stop out of the way temporarily. I'll be a little cautious coming in. Reason is, if I'm taking too much off of the tip and not getting down the full surface of that tooth, let's say too much off the tip, I need to bring this blade this way, which will calls me to rotate the blade slightly and bring it in on that, more toward the bottom portion of that tooth. Sometimes I find instead of changing this angle, once you get it close, just undo this and go left or right. Keep this pretty much where it is this way. When you're doing that, if you set your stop up ahead of time, every time you move this over back and forth, it changes your stop position. So I usually adjust the stop at the last, just go in carefully. So anyway, I'm locked down here. I went in and I look good, eyeballing it. So what I like to do is make a little mark where I'm starting. And I like to blacken out the teeth with a magic marker. And I'll do 2 or 3. Because if I'm off on this first one, I'll go to the second one on my second adjustment, rather than keep taking more and more and more off that one tooth in the wrong angle. So I'll come in, bring your tooth over into the blade, check it out, and right now I'm touching off on about the top of the tooth, coming down about halfway into the full surface of that tooth. So I really want to change my angle this way a little bit. But that means I need to bring this that way. So rather than moving this, I'll just come over here. You can just kind of like fine tune this thing real easily without this thing moving around all over the place on you. I'll come to the second tooth now. Although, I'm wondering if that's a good idea, being that some teeth may be off a little bit already. I'm going to go back to the first tooth again, like I just did. I'm not going to worry about taking too much off. A lot better, but I'm going to go a hair more. I don't want to go too much where I'm not taking enough off the tip, because then obviously the tip is what's doing most of your cutting, but also you like to have it cleaned off all the way down if you can, or most of the way. That's at least the way I see it. And that looks pretty good, so I'm going to leave it there. I'll try another tooth out. And once again, it looks pretty decent. So that's much easier to get this angle on your tooth adjusted to the right angle coming into your blade, your cutting diamond blade there, without really, it's just no hassle to it. Now once I do that, I'll come in, set up my depth, which is, like I said, so easy to do. And it's very precisionally done by just a little crank of a turn in or out, ready to go. From there on, I'll maybe go back and take a little more off this and consider that my first tooth. A lot of control because your hands are here, you're moving this. This seemed to be a really awkward situation, and even if you were going to bring the tooth into the blade, you're going to pull this forward, then rotate your blade, you know, on this arm on that post. But I find that if you just eyeball it, bring it in between your teeth, bring the tooth over, it just seems to work really well. So, the only other thing I was going to say is that if you want to build one of these, I don't know if you can see these dimensions, but I'm going to give you what I came up for dimensions. I'm going to move this back out of the way. Wish I wouldn't have now, because I could have went ahead and... All right, this platform, this sliding platform is 10 inches by 19. These, of course, you'll place on after you get your box built because they, you know, whatever the dimension is on your two parallel sliding sides of this box is going to determine where you want these. My box happens to be inside 14 this way, 16 that way. That's the full base if you were to cut the base out the way I have it. As you notice, I mounted this off center to the right here. I've got about 3/4, 7/8 of an inch over here and maybe an inch in the back, just to give you some room to get into that nut to change your angle. Bolted that down. I put these on because the feet are sticking down. I'd rather have this sliding on my bench than the bolts. Plus, these bolts being back here, if they were up closer, it would be okay, but this box will tend to move on you. This basically is a trial and error thing that you can just come up with. I'm not going to give it any dimensions on that. Now, I gave you the base. This side happens to be 4 3/4 by 16 long. The 4 3/4 sitting on top of the base gives you the right height when this is on here for the blade to be in the center of your wheel. So that's, you know, that would be kind of a important dimension to keep. Unless you went 3/4 with this, now you might want to lower this a 1/4 of an inch because you're thicker on that, bringing it up higher. All right, now my front happens to be 13 by 3 inches high. You don't want to come all the way up because you got to drop in on your slots here on your sliding base. These are kind of critical. If you cut these out really nice, square, and the back and the front exactly the same, when you build and put the two sides up against those, it's going to give you a parallel, two parallel sliding surfaces that are going to maintain the same dimension all the way down. Obviously, you don't want this one to be a little bit tighter, and now you're out of parallel to where this is going to bind up on you. If you put these on and it comes out to be too tight, you can always just sand a little bit to make it freer moving without making it sloppy. This bolt here, I think I mentioned before, is their blade support. That's just a regular 5/8 bolt with a nut. And basically too, you can adjust the height of that because you want that, you don't want that holding your blade up in the air or down like that. So you can come in and just loosen that nut, do what you got to do to get your proper height on your blade support. I don't use the ratcheting pawl. I use this for the stop. I don't move the motor in and out anymore. I do this, move the blade into the motor, and I just chucked some more blades I have. I can't find one that's got the teeth offset on the angle, every other tooth. But at least if I do come up with one, I'll be able to find out what the angle of that tooth is and maybe make some more marks so that I don't have to guess. I suppose too, when you do your first blade that's got an angle and you set this up, you can use that same method by blacking it off and seeing whether you're taking the full surface of that tooth when you're touching off on it. So that's it, and then like I said, I really like this. I like it so much better than the way that comes from the factory. I just found it to be very, I guess you might say, a little frustrating at times trying to get this blade angle set up. That's the worst part of it. Plus, I didn't like this. This wasn't very smooth operating as far as the motion of the motor in and out with the handle. I find this much more easy. Got two hands on it if you want, holding the blade. And this, so much easier to adjust. A lot of flexibility, and you can put multiple holes. If you're not sure where to put this hole, I wouldn't put it way out here because you could, but with it somewhat in a happy medium in the middle, I have a feeling it's putting more pressure down across the total surface of that arm against this to give it more rigidity, or so it won't flex around and move on you. And you don't have to crank this down near as hard. I mean, it's good to crank it down hard enough where it won't move on you, but on that arm, on the post, I just found that if you didn't have it cranked down pretty tight, it can move on you. Alrighty.